Hello. Uh, about a week or so ago, I did a couple of launch attempts on a Titan 2 just to show what's specific about the launch profile of that vehicle. And I got a little distracted and hadn't done any other ones, but I got a request to do launch of a Saturn 5. Now it surprised me a little, just because the Saturn 5 to me is like the default launch profile. So in my brain, it's like the easiest thing, but of course it isn't. It's a lot of people would design their own rockets or fly completely different things. So I can definitely understand how I'd get a request for the launch profile of it, and I wanted to do it anyway, so I'm doing it now. Thanks for the request. So I've with KCT installed. It was quite a pain to get here, but relative inclination low. I've selected the moon. I had to do some crazy time warping and guessing just to get a launch that's just before sunset, it looks like, judging by where the sun is. Yep. All right. So, but I'm at a low inclination, so I'm trying to launch into the plane of the moon because ultimately, this upper stage, they'll want to get it to be shot at the moon. So I might include that as part of the launch profile video, maybe not. But so let me just do some basic description like I did in the other one. So if you look, what's the starting thrust weight ratio? It's 1.15. It's pretty much as low as you can possibly have. Like if it was just one, the engines would be running and it wouldn't even move up. So that's kind of the start. So let's light it up. I might have a little trouble not hitting that, but we will see. So engines need to spool up. You can see them starting to burn down there in the flame trenches. All right, and I've released the clamps. So there we go. So it looks like we're starting to move up as we build up thrust. So even now as we're moving, we're not exactly at high altitude here. And we're already getting higher thrust weight ratio. The Saturn V was just really overloaded with mass. It's 3,000 ton craft, which is huge. So even though it has the largest rocket engines ever built at the time, possibly still today, I don't recall offhand, that just can barely take off from the pad. And all this smoke screen makes it slow to a crawl. I definitely look forward to being able to do launches like this once 1.1 is completely rolled out and things are updated for it. So for this craft, like I said, it's kind of the default craft in my mind and descent profile. So yeah, wait until we're moving up at about 50 meters per second, and then I'm going to pitch to 88 degrees. There we go, just a tiny bit, just to get the gravity turn started. So now we're up to a higher thrust weight ratio. So if you keep an eye on, see that value, or I like this value because I like more precision. We started at a really low thrust weight ratio, but when this stage burns out, it actually gets to a very high thrust weight ratio that's kind of considered both unacceptable for crew and for the craft itself, because I believe it's the higher the larger the range of g-forces that a craft endures and masses it passes through, the more likely it is to experience unusual vibrations. So the next, so we will be shutting off the core engine, and I'm pretty sure I hotkeyed that to 5, to F, to action group 5. I don't recall perfectly offhand. So at about 150 meters per second, I'm going to lock to surface velocity, so this will finally dip low enough that you can see it below 90. Now, it was actually 88 or whatever, but MechJeb doesn't worry about calculating it when it's that close to 90, for fairly good reasons. So it starts to tip over here, approaching Mach 1, nowhere near max Q. So I'm just going to time accelerate just a little bit. Thankfully, things like KJR and just kind of well-designed parts and things make it not wobble even at time warp, even though it's a ridiculously large craft. So still coming up, approaching Mach 1. We're not pitched over too much, but I'll probably want to pitch over a little more. So let's just take it down 1 degree. So just the basic metrics that I usually rely on, like basic benchmarks, even apply for a vehicle like this, where you want to be maybe around 45 degrees at 1,000 meters per second. So we're definitely a little high for that, but that's okay. we've got other things to optimize for. And I mean, we can you can smooth it out. Like, it's because it burns for so long. This craft burns for a very long time. You've got a lot of room to to fix your mistakes. And even with a perfect Ascent profile, you end up with a good bit of delta V left in the tank, because in practice, it was meant and able to go around the Earth more than one time, I believe. Just like a park and checkout orbit to make sure, and they would lose a bit of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to boil off during that phase. So let's see, we're pitching down. Let's base that back out. So we're up to Mach 2. We're past max Q. Now our speed, is the square of our speed is increasing slower than the atmosphere is dropping off. Something like that. 1/2 density of the air times our velocity squared is what gives you, max Q times a coefficient, I guess. Okay, so we're coming down. Probably want to come down just a little more. So I really just keep an eye on this number. I'm currently kind of tweaking with I want to write a KOS program for general ascents, but specifically I want it to be effective for launch to rendezvous, so I can do some good on-orbit construction in my career. That's kind of the long-term goal of that, is to be able to launch like Titan-based launch vehicles and have them rendezvous in orbit. And who knows, that's pretty much dependent on me getting that KOS code working well. Let's see. So we're nearing where we want to shut off an engine. You see the G-forces are rising and rising. They rise faster near the end of the stage. Okay, so I do want to pitch down a bit. So I'm above 45 degrees when I hit this. Oh, need to really turn that off. So I'm a little higher than I want to be, just from my Ascent profile. But you could artificially fix that by pitching lower. So ultimately, when the second stage burns out, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So when the first stage burns out, we want to be at like 130 kilometers is how I usually think about it. And so I'm going to be a bit above that, because I always think of the Ascent profile for this as 130 kilometers like here at stage burnout. Oh, by the way, so see the G-forces, they're getting pretty high, so I hit F5, but really you could do the same thing by right-clicking the engine and shutting it off. If so, activate, I could have shut off the engine using that. So that drops the G-forces, because as this stage drains out, you get to really high G-forces. So I'm going to arc a bit lower, because I'm a bit above my target altitude. But obviously I don't want to be in the process of pitching when this is definitely a suboptimal trajectory. But if I succeed, you'll be able to see that you don't need a very optimal trajectory to put the Saturn V into orbit before the trans-lunar injection, this reignition of the upper stage that sends you to the moon. So there we go. So that burns out. You don't have to hot stage or anything. There's plenty of solids on this. This is providing a bit of forward ullage, so I space again to light up those engines. So that was settling the fuel in the tanks while we coast here. There we go. The engines are happily lit up, and now I'm going to drop this ring. Two-state, what's it called? Something separation. Oh, cool, you can see the shadow of the ring. There we go, and dual plane separation, that's it. And so I no longer need that escape tower slash, this succeeded. By the time this burns out, we're going to be moving, way too fast. So kind of as they go through abort modes, we no longer need that as an abort option. It's not useful to abort using that at this point. If we wanted to abort, I think that we would just separate out. Oh yeah, I've got reflection installed, the reflection plugins. This is shinier than I'm used to it being. So this stage is really low thrust. You can see it was below 0.8, but it does end up delivering a huge amount of delta V. That's the G-force changes quite a bit over this. So let me just kind of recalibrate to this. Like, this stage starts at such a low thrust to weight versus the end of that other stage. So that's why you kind of want to target a certain altitude at the burnout of a stage, because after that burnout, there's a long lead-up time, generally, if you've designed a craft like many of these historic craft. While, like right now, I can't really make much of a dent in that at all, where it's just a couple of degrees before that stage burned out. would have made a huge difference in this number. So that's about how I want it. So there's a couple different ways that I can play this. I used to just like block it to orbital prograde, and it's just going to follow this down as, you know, as we approach apo. This would arc down and down and down. And it's kind of depending on what your trajectory is at, because I'd like to get this to about 180 or so, you know, 180, 200, something in that range. I think is, you know, anything like that is effective. That's kind of ultimately where I want to be parking. But what I'm going to do is just kind of make sure I'm not hurting my relative inclination over time, and I'm just going to lock it to this. So 15 degrees or so, that seems fine, or that's about a minute and something out. So I'll revisit these numbers once I'm a bit closer to that. So I'm just going to time warp ahead. Yeah, these engines are very high efficiency, ISP of 424, whereas in what my current career mode with my early rockets, it's like half of that, less than half of that possibly. They're just very efficient engines. Not the most efficient. They've made variants that basically, like, the thrust chamber is of higher pressure and the nozzles are more optimized for vacuum. They get like 462, something like that. Pretty damn high. So I'm a little below my target of 180. Not the worst thing, but just because of the timings of this vehicle, that is definitely a good altitude to be targeting here. So to target it, you know, because I'm short of it, and, you know, I'm pitching up will make this time both fall slower and this grow a little bit more. But as I approach apoapsis, once my vertical speed is completely nulled out, this won't be increasing. It'll start decreasing as I'm falling from that. So I'm going to wait until I level out, because I'm okay leveling out at about, this is actually, it is increasing just a little bit. It's like kind of the buildup of drop torture. So it actually does end up getting to the 180 I want, and this number is decreasing slower and slower, but it is still decreasing. So I'm going to wait until it stops decreasing, or it actually hits 0 to adjust my pitch. Now, obviously in practice, a real flight computer, or, you know, what I write in my KOS code, will make many more fine adjustments than this. Right now, I mostly do launches like this just for conservation of my own time. Which is usually why I won't do like a lot of on-orbit rendezvous construction, but, you know, I find it fun, and so it's worth my time. Okay, so I'm actually falling a bit. I definitely let that get lower than I should. Only have about 2 minutes left in the stage. The G-force is, so the thrust has gotten up, and it has more effect on your, it's a lot easier to maintain an altitude. Like here I'm at, what am I at, 30 degrees, and I'm gaining vertical speed pretty steadily, both because the thrust to weight ratio of the stage has got higher, and because we're moving faster. I think that's just the calculus of you know, the translation of these velocities. So let's just look back, because we're going to get a sunset possibly during this launch. Not sure. So we're going to be near orbital speed when this stage burns out, if you kind of add these numbers up. But not quite at that, because if we were at orbital speed, that would mean that the rocket had to carry this whole dead, dry stage to orbital velocity, which is quite a waste. So that's how it looks with just the actual sunlight being cast on it. And I rather like that myself, but that's just because I increased the brightness on my screen. I know in a YouTube video it doesn't look as good, but I definitely prefer it that way. So here now, we're up to just a minute. So during this minute of time, I'll pause for a quick moment. So during this minute, we have tons of control, right? It's just about this pitch which controls our time to apo. It's effortless. You know, I pitch down just a little bit, and this number is going to, you know, decrease if I want it to. I pitch up a little bit, I get the opposite, right? It's totally my choice. But we're going to go from, oh, and also I should be 6. There we go. Shut down the that core engine to keep the G-forces down. There's another maneuver in reality that happens, like because a little bit of this fuel would have boiled off during launch, the ratio of fuel to oxidizer of these engines would change to precisely drain this empty. Right now we don't simulate that in Realism Overhaul. It's a cool concept. It's a cool thing that existed. It's just not currently coded in. It's kind of on Nathan Kell's to-do desire list, but just not being worked on yet. Anyway, so I shut down that engine, it reduced the G-forces, but they're still mounting up pretty high. So because the next stage is going to have a lower thrust-to-weight ratio, and we're going to need it for a little bit, I try to push this out a little bit of time. And it really, like, in this design, I want it, like, let's say 15 seconds, 30 seconds will be fine. Because, we're going to need to burn for just a couple minutes to complete the orbit. So that's what I want to target here. But if, let's say I had more delta V that I did have to get out of this stage, something like the SLS maybe, where I needed to get a bit more, or the thrust-to-weight ratio here was even lower, then what you'd be doing at the end of this stage burn is pushing this time out to a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And because you're still arcing up as you approach it, even if you have really low thrust-to-weight ratio, you can really make a lot out of that. There's a big difference between being 30 seconds away from apoapsis and 2 minutes. You've got a lot. It's a kind of a dual value lever. So stage burned out. So stage dropped the second stage. These little engines in practice should have fallen off in history. Here we can't because we're just using these little sergeants as the kicker, as the ullage for that. So they used solid ullage, and then these are liquid, so ullage to settle the fuel. And here we go. So I'm pretty much at what to me looks like about the same pitch as I was at previously. And see, we're lower thrust-to-weight ratio, and now we're approaching that apo. And we see where we've still hung out really close to what I said was my target goal of 180. Now in practice, you can lob it a bit higher. Like you could lob it to 210, let's say, and then follow, rather than pitching above the horizon like I was doing. That's another perfectly valid strategy as well. I find it just a little less efficient in delta V. Oh, nice, and we're going to lose the sun. There we go. See, so sunset happened from orbit here during our ascent. It's pretty neat. And so now we just need a little bit of delta V in order to complete our orbit here. So really now, again, I'm just managing this so this stays close to 0. Now, I'm okay with it falling a little bit because we're so close to full orbital velocity that it's going to have a pretty minuscule effect. It looks like we're actually heading up again. So let's go down a bit here. Now it looks like it's still doing just fine. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty gradual orbit. It takes like 15 minutes for this craft to get to orbit, which is really long. If you watch the previous video I did in this series with the Titan II, it takes 5 minutes to get to orbit. It was designed as an ICBM, and you can tell from the burn time and the thrust-to-weight ratios that the crew endures in that launch. But with this, it's 15 minutes to orbit, and that's by no means all the burning of the mission. Okay, so we're pretty much at orbital velocity. Let's just match prograde. Time to apo just kind of becomes meaningless because we're so close. And so I'm just going to wait until this is about 180. These numbers will flip, and I'll hit X, shut down the engines. There we go. So we're in orbit. So it was not, like, that was the first time I've launched the Saturn V in a long time. Definitely not the most efficient. Sometimes I've ended up with 3,300 delta V left in the tanks, sometimes 3,500. But yeah, that's the whole launch to orbit. So if you're interested in the TLI burn, the next maneuver. So let's see. I mean, hopefully you can figure it out. But let me just show you how I usually do it. Maneuver planner, because I'm lazy and I love MechJeb. So I've already targeted the moon. Hohmann transfer? Hohmann sounds right. Hohmann transfer to target, create node, boom. So in practice, in history, they would have actually done another circle around before doing this burn. But actually, since I'm just doing it, because so much has happened in the last 15 minutes in a real launch of this, they'd want the extra 90 minutes to check everything out, make sure they're okay before they go for the moon. But you know what? We're just going to go straight to the moon. So we're going to target. Oh, right, I need to, okay, let's see, turn on RCS. Yeah, I may as well hit, so hit space to turn those engines on. Okay, so I'm just going to, so in practice, I don't want these burning. I generally actually lock these or disable the RCS ports, because in practice, you want, this is fuel I'm going to be bringing to Definitely didn't want that burning. In practice, that's fuel I want to bring to the moon. Activate fuel cells. Start warming liquid oxygen, turning it to breathing oxygen. So we've aimed here. So about half of, so those numbers are going to look crazy now because I've got these on. But that's about half and half. Estimated burn time, that's reasonable. So want to check this engine. Propellant's very stable, but in case it wasn't, I'd hold H. Should be able to hold H. Nothing's, why are you not burning? Or, no, it is, no, not enough. I'm not sure why, offhand, it's not providing that thrust forward. But this fuel is stable, but normally you'd do a little bit of thrusting forward, either just using your RCS, like hitting H, tapping that, or sometimes I just shut this engine down and if you actually throttle up engine when it's just RCS, it gives you the thrust forward. But in this case, I've got very stable, so I'm good for reignition. Point at node, hit Z to point forward, and those engines are going to keep, a little bit of wobble there. So these are going to keep running. I don't want them to be running. I suppose that's a disadvantage of them being set up as an engine, I believe, rather than as RCS. But it's okay. I could have action grouped them, but I just shut them down manually like that. And so this engine is going to burn. So this number, pretty close to this number. I was pretty close to not having enough fuel to make this burn. But that's why I launched into this inclination. So I'm pretty close to being in the same plane that is coplanar with the moon. The ring of my orbit, if it was larger, would be in the exact same ring, disk as the orbit of the moon. And that's why I launched, specifically when I launched. The trick, my pain in the butt was launching, kind of setting things up so that launch was during the day. In practice, it's fine if you do it at night. I just definitely prefer to do YouTube video launches during the day because they look better. Because this is what they'd actually normally look like, and obviously these YouTube videos don't look as good. I'm okay with them. It's kind of a relaxed launch in the dark like that, but in practice it's just much better in sunlight. Okay, so just waiting for this this burn to complete. So I actually have an old series that I might link to, which is basically the whole mission after this point. Once you separate this from the stack, you do transposition and docking. So the command module, service module, separate from this empty stage, and after you've thrown off these supports, lunar module adapters, but they're also holding this whole craft up. So they're very important fairing parts. You throw them off, just turn this craft around and dock with the lunar module and separate it from here, which I believe Crystal made a lot easier recently than it used to be. Although we're still, we're hoping that somebody who's a modeler will kind of step in and offer to be able to help out, because the collider for this part needs to be fixed. Right now we've Crystal stretched it so that it's longer than it should actually be, because in practice the legs of the lunar module should be sticking down into here. So the collider of this part needs to be fixed, the Saturn instrument unit. But I'm not a 3D renderer, modeler, or anything. But if somebody can take a look at the part in FASA for this and then correct it so the collider should be concave or convex, the opposite of whatever it currently is. Because right now any part that sticks into the hollow space inside this ring causes problems in KSP in 1.0.5, and the same problem will exist in 1.1. So we're just about there. So I'm just coming out of time warp. You see, the craft has gotten so light now that even just this single engine, which has high thrust compared to a lot of modern engines, 10 times that of the RL-10, the thrust is getting pretty heavy. So they're under quite the forces during that final burn for the moon. Now, usually I would have also let MechJeb carry out the burn itself, but just for brevity, to not have to kind of set that up carefully, because it's if it burns out the ignitions, then I'm screwed. Just for brevity of the video, I just set it up and did it manually, so I'm gonna have to manually kill it once it gets there. So you can see, having burned here has pushed our apoapsis high, really high. Now it's kind of logarithmic, so it gradually comes up both because of the delta V requirements and thrust to weight ratio, until finally you've spent your about 3,100 meters per second of delta V, and then you get this to intercept with the moon. So I'm going to kill this node so I can just catch it visually as I come by, and there, X. So I'm actually going to crash in the moon. So by no means do you need that kind of perfection here. You can do mid-course corrections in practice. That's what they would do after this. So just a quick save. Sorry, it's a longer video than I expected to do, but hey, ended up getting to do the TLI as well, which is pretty awesome. So in practice, then they would have, well, I think they did coast for just a little bit of time, half an hour or an hour or so, and then they would separate these. But I'm not going to do that because, like I said, video is already long. And I have persistent rotation, so it just kind of wobbles. But yeah, there we go. We've been thrown away from the moon, or from the Earth towards the moon. And just at the end of this video, I will, pretty sure this should separate cleanly, but if not, you'll see the problem that we're dealing with the FASA parts for the collider. So these will separate. In practice, for transposition docking, I would want those ports on. So you would want these on, but the RCS ports in this off. I've got everything very precisely balanced in the FASA realism overhaul. Disable RCS ports, so that if you just have the RCS ports in this on and in this off, it's perfectly balanced torques and forces to be able to rotate without translating. So you can just turn this craft around to dock with the LEM without causing it to wander off in crazy directions. And there we go. Just separate out those leaves. Kind of randomly guessed the numbers so that they should wander away nicely. And if you wait a minute or two, they will move away. And then you'd be able to rotate this around and dock with the LEM. But I've done that in some other videos, but I'll leave that as an exercise to the viewer if you're interested in carrying out this whole mission, because it is a really cool mission to do. If you're interested in history, you can entirely carry out this historical mission. Everything's being set up nicely in FASA. So thanks for watching the video. I hope that was interesting and informative. That's how you launch a Saturn V, both to low Earth orbit, like I did there, and then even carry out the trans-lunar injection burn if you so choose to. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.